Rev up your engines! Today I'm going to talk about a common car air conditioning problem and how you can fix it. The problem is this. Say the passenger side is blowing cold air, but the driver's side is not blowing cold air. Now in an old car like this 94 Celica, it's a simple air conditioning system. It doesn't have dual controls or anything. It's got AC, you turn it on or off. Then it's often a very simple problem, just being low on refrigerant. Now this may be a 26-year-old car, but I've only had to add refrigerant one time. Now here's an old broken AC compressor. All air conditioning compressors leak somewhat over time. The fan belt spins the shaft. The shaft has to have a seal on it. If that seal was perfect, it would run dry, burn out, and all the freon would leak out. They all leak a little bit of refrigerant and AC oil in order to lubricate that seal. Now in the case of Toyotas, it's often a very slow leak. I mean, I've only had to add refrigerant to this thing once in 26 years. So it's a very slow leak. But when it leaks out enough, it will affect the performance of your air conditioner. And if you understand how air conditioners work, it's totally logical. The compressor compresses the refrigerant, it's hot. Then it pushes it to the condenser in the front, which gets hot air. Hot air gets blown away. Then that gets sucked into the evaporator inside the dash that expands and gets cool air. Then it's sucked back into the compressor in an endless cycle. And since most cars have the evaporator on the passenger side, if you're running low on refrigerant, the passenger side can still blow somewhat cool, but by the time it makes it over to the driver's side, it's not cool anymore. So just being low on refrigerant can make it do that. So if you know how to use AC gauges, you can hook them up to see if you're low on refrigerant, and if you are, you can add some. And if you don't, you can just pay a mechanic to check it. Doesn't take 5 minutes. And here's a money-saving tip. Guys are always trying to sell people stuff. Say you're low on refrigerant, they'll say, oh wow, your compressor's leaking, you need to buy a new one. Before you spend a whole bunch of money, if it's been years or if the system never has had any refrigerant added, first, just add some refrigerant. I've done that on cars, and sometimes they last 5-6 years before they stop working again, and then you just fill them up once every 5 or 6 years. Always start simple and work your way up. And if you do add refrigerant, if your system doesn't have any of that leak dye, a lot of them are made with leak dye, but if it doesn't, you could add a little bit of the leak dye in too, so then when it finally leaks out, you'll see the dye coming out of the area and you'll know which one is leaking. Now many cars just have the single AC system. Even this relatively new Matrix, it's got a single system. Cold on one side, not on the other, odds are you're just low on refrigerant. But if you have a more modern dual control system where you control the left side and the right side independently, like this Lexus, then things can get complicated. Because here, as you can see, you can adjust the driver's side from cold to whatever temperature you want, and the same thing on the passenger side. You can adjust that too. Now here, of course, you're dealing a level of sophistication all run by computers that can make your head spin. But basically, here's how it works. The computer system takes the inputs. There's temperature indicators inside, and inside the dash are blend doors that open or close to a certain degree to make it whatever temperature you set it here. Now, of course, a lot of it's fantasy. You put it on 69 degrees. It's not going to stay exactly 69, but you can make it so one side can be as hot as you want. In this case, we'll go to hot, or the other side can be as cold as you want. And in that case, the passenger side, it would turn the duct to the heater open using the actuators that open the door, so you'd have hot air blowing here, but on the driver's side, it would only open the actuator for the AC system, so cold air would come out here. And you can guess what happens with computer actuated systems when they break. I mean, thank heavens this is a Lexus. They hardly ever break, so I don't have to mess around with it. But when they do break, unfortunately, you're gonna have to find a guy like me that has one of these really fancy computers to access that data, to do bi-directional testing. I'll show you how it works on this Lexus. Well, the beginning's easy. It just plugs into the data port, plugged in. Then we put on the car and we're looking for stuff for the air conditioning system. Well, the air conditioning system on this particular one is part of the body system, so we'll push body. It's got all kinds of information, like it's showing that the magnetic clutch is off now because the AC just is cycling, and in a second there, now it's back on again. You get all kinds of data you can analyze, and that's various active tests that you can do too. Now, of course, if you don't have one of these fancy scan tools, good luck trying to figure out what's wrong if one of those blend doors is breaking. Plus, most of the time, it'll be something like an actuator motor, You got to take the whole dash of the car apart to access it. Repairs can easily top $1,000 on many cars these days if one of those stupid little doors breaks. But here's another tip that might save you a ton of money. Let's say you're having electrical problems. The first thing I advise all my customers to do is have the battery load tested and have the alternator load tested. Many auto parts stores do that free. You can even buy a quality thing to test it yourself these days for $70, $80. You don't have to buy an expensive one like this Midtronics. This thing was over $800 when it was new. Today, you can get $60, $70, $80 versions from other companies that work quite well. Realize that all computer-controlled systems require a steady, accurate supply of voltage. If the voltage goes too low or too high, squirrely things can happen. If you're cold on one side and hot on the other, maybe there's just not enough power going to the other side. Always check the battery and alternator before you start spending a ton of money doing computer analysis and tearing the dash apart. And here's another trick. Let's say this side's blowing cold and this side's blowing hot. Well, the actuators are up in here. Sometimes just going whacking the dash really hard. If it's a stuck actuator, a lot of times they'll on-stick. I've had some customers that drove cars years that way. When it wasn't cold on one side, I'd give it a good whack, and it would start working again. Realize those stupid doors are generally made out of plastic, and they can stick as they age, and if whacking works, what the heck? I have a common problem in 2010 Toyota Corolla. It's leaking coolant, and the AC is not as cold as it should be. So we'll start with the coolant leak. We'll pop the hood, put up the prop. Pretty obvious where the leak's coming from. As we go in here, there's the leak. The stupid plastic crap is cracked and it's leaking out. Well, shame on Toyota in this case. They did like BMW. In 2010, they got the stupid plastic connect with the metal prong coming out that the little overflow hose goes into, and it broke off because it's cheap plastic crap. If they would have made it some other way like they used to and not have the junction here, it wouldn't have had a problem. Or if they would have made this out of metal instead of cheap plastic crap, it wouldn't leak. But they used cheap plastic crap, so we're going to change that first. First, we'll get a drain pan and stick it on there, so they don't get coolant all over the place. It pollutes, animals can drink it and get sick, so put a little pan under there. Now this broke off, so we gotta take the clamp off. You squeeze it, put it up here. The old piece is kind of stuck in there, so we'll crunch it up a little, and we can pull it out. With bigger pliers, squeeze the rubber hose. And once we squeeze the one side, we can pull off half of it. The rest will go in a drain pan. Then we'll squeeze the other half. Move that out of the way. And then pull that off. There. And out comes the old cheap plastic piece of crap. As you can see, the plastic broke because it's junky plastic. If they would use metal, you wouldn't have this problem, but they did, so you gotta buy another one. It was an aftermarket part. It actually seems to be more solid. Just slips on, it's not rocket science. One end goes in the other. You push it in, the pliers and grab it. Slide it over. Careful not to pinch your fingers. Then we do the other side. And of course, don't forget the little one. First we'll push it on. Then we'll grab the clamp. We'll stick it sideways, that works better. It's on there nice and tight. And as you can see, it doesn't really need that plastic crap. It stays on there perfectly fine by itself. Then we just go to the radiator cap. It's a cold engine, so you don't have any worries. And this is a Toyota, so you want the pink Asian coolant. You don't want to mix different kinds. Fill it to the top. Then start it up. Turn the AC on full blast so the fan's blowing, and then pour it as the air bubbles come up. It might take a few minutes. And don't forget to fill the reservoir too halfway, right in here. And put the top back on. Now we're on to part two. The owner said the AC isn't cold enough. Well, we have it on full blast, so let's stick this thermometer and see what the vent temp is. So we'll go inside, and yeah, it's not as cold as it should be. We'll check the vent here. You want it on full blast, face, and recirculate, because recirculate's the coldest. And with it stuck in the top vent, we're going to wait about 5 minutes to see how cool it gets. Now it's 95 outside, And it's only getting down to about 62 degrees. Now that's okay, but here in Texas, that's not cool enough. So what I'm gonna do is evacuate the AC system and fill it up with a factory load. This baby's 10 years old. Realize all air conditioning systems leak some refrigerant because the end of the compressor, it spins on your fan belt. That's what runs it, unless you have an electric one like a Toyota Prius, but this is a normal one. So it's spinning the pulley. The pulley has a shaft. The shaft spins the compressor. Well, the shaft has a seal at the end of it to keep the refrigerant from leaking out. But that seal has to allow a little bit of refrigerant and refrigerant oil to leak out to lubricate that seal. Because if it ran perfectly sealed, it would run dry on the outside, the shaft would spin, burn out the seal, and it would all leak out. So all cars leak refrigerant over time. This particular one's never had any added. It's 10 years old, so it's a good thing to fill it up with a factory load. Now you could get one of those ad cans and take a guess with the pressure reading, but I do it the correct way. I use my evacuation machine to take it all out, then to put a factory load back in by weight. But how much weight? Well, they were nice to put a sticker on here. It says maximum 0.47 kilograms, 1.04 pounds. So we're going to put 0.47 kilograms back in. No odds are you're not going to have a recycling machine like I have in the garage, so you're going to pay a mechanic to do this. Or like I said, if you want, you could try one of those little cans and add it and guess with the pressure, but that's always a guess. Have a mechanic empty it all out, fill it by a factory load. That's the most efficient, accurate way. Now I've already evacuated it out using the low side port, so now we're going to add it in. See, the scale's at 0, so we'll open it up and start letting refrigerant in. Going into the system, right there. And when we stop when it gets to 0.47, but we'll have to start it up because it won't fill without the compressor running. Turn on full blast again, recirculate, and as you can see, more is going in. We stop when it's 0.47. It's getting closer. There we go, right on the money. Now I'll take it for a spin, see how cold it gets. As we go inside, just sitting here, wow, what a difference. Not putting out like 34 degrees air. Big deal from 60. So don't always be disheartened if your AC isn't blowing that cold. In this case, lady took it to the dealer. They wanted over $1,000 to fix it. They were just trying to rip her off. These systems do leak out over time. No refrigerant was put in for 10 years. If this thing lasts for years more, just refill it again. I looked all around. I didn't see any big leaks anywhere. I even put some dye in it. I didn't see dye coming out anywhere. Odds are, years from now, this thing will still be blowing cold. They all leak a little bit over time. And if you got to add it once every 10 years, be happy that's all you got to do. 2008 Toyota Highlander. The AC's not cold. The customer bought it about 6 months ago, and the AC was a little bit cold, but now it doesn't work at all. So what am I assuming? Loss of refrigerant. First, let's hook up the gauge. Now, there's low side and high side. We're going to hook up the low side first. We get the low side. It's the one that says L, obviously, L. Down there. Not the greatest place to access, but I've seen worse. I'll have to adjust this so it goes up. Now at least I can get it in the hole. Try to snap it on. You gotta wiggle it and snap it on. And in this case, there's not much wiggling room. There. Then we'll turn the handle. That opens the valve up. It's got 65 pounds pressure. It should do something, so let's turn it on. Start it up. Put it on AC full blast. There we go, full blast. Let's look at it. We shut the AC off, and as you can see now, the compressor isn't spinning anymore. We'll turn it back on, make sure it's full blast, and as we look down, we can see it's spinning again. So the compressor's spinning. When we look at the gauge, it's pretty much the same. Now we're going to check the high pressure too. Look up the other gauge to the high side, which of course says H. Snap it on. Now it's got 100 pounds, and the other has 60 pounds running. So, if we're lucky, it could just be low on refrigerant. When I go inside, this side is cooler than that side. This is outside air temperature. This is a little cooler. This is somewhat cooler, and that's a lot cooler over there. When you're low on refrigerant, evaporators in there will often blow a little cooler on the other side. So we're going to add some refrigerant and see what happens. The tank's here. It's going to add refrigerant when I open it up, and we'll watch the high side pressure. Here we go. We're going to open it up. We hope that the high side starts to go up some. It's not going up all that much. And as we can see on the low side, The low side is way too high. It should run maybe 30, 35. The high side could run 180, 190. The low side being that high, there's serious problems. Now I'll check the cooling fans. That fan's spinning. The other fan's spinning, so the fans are working. If the fans don't work, the pressures will get too high, but these fans are working. It's not the fans. For some reason, the low side is too high, but the high side is too low. But the compressor's still spinning. I'm guessing on this baby, the compressor's just worn out, sucking and compressing correctly. Because the high side should be higher. And if the high side doesn't compress it enough, you won't get high enough pressure to cool it down. The low side can stay too high because the compressor isn't sucking it in fast enough. Seems like a compressor failure to me. But it could be a lot worse, so I'm gonna get my fancy scan tool out. Realize even in a 12-year-old Toyota, the HVAC system, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, is all computer run. So we're gonna do a big scan and see if there's anything shows weird on that. AC work used to be a lot easier, but with these fancy compressors that are computer run, a lot of things can go wrong that you need a really good computer to diagnose it with. Because I've had customers, they just guessed and said, oh, I'm going to change the compressor because it's obviously not pumping right. Only to find out that the compressor was okay, but it was all the stupid computers weren't controlling it correctly. They wasted $800 and didn't fix anything. But nothing looks particularly bad from the data itself. And as we look on the trouble codes, unfortunately, it doesn't have any. Now, since this vehicle was purchased used, and he said the AC never worked all that well, we know nothing of the history of the vehicle. There's no codes, the data doesn't look bad, the compressor's spinning, but the pressures are all wrong. So I'm gonna suck all the refrigerant out with my recycling machine first. Then I'm gonna fill it up with a factory load by weight and pray something good happens, because if it doesn't, at a minimum it's gonna need a compressor and it might need a whole lot more. Now you really never know who's worked on this car, what they've done. While I'm evacuating the system, what we're doing is we're making it neutral. Be completely empty. No air, no nothing. If somebody put too much refrigerant in, if they got air in the system, if they use the wrong refrigerant, they can all make them go bonkers. So what I'm going to do is empty out, put in a factory load and watch the gauges and see what happens. Now as we can see here, a maximum of 0.82 kilograms. So we got the scale at 0. We'll open it up and add 0.82 kilograms. When this says 0.82, it's done. So we'll go inside and start it up with the compressor running. It'll fill up better. Start it up. Put the AC on full blast. Outside air. Then we'll watch the pressure. And as we can see, this is already starting to come up, which it should. Now the low side will always be higher while you're filling it up. You want this to get higher. And we stop when this says 0.82. And as you can see, this is climbing. Let's pray some idiot got air in it or overfilled the system. We'll see what's happening inside while it's filling up. And guess what? That's cool, and that's getting cooler. Let's hope it fixes it. Now have patience, because it can take a while until it's fully filled up, and this is 0.82. Realize I'm adding it as a gas. The tank is right side up. If I turn it upside down, it would add it as a liquid, which is much faster. But it's also dangerous. The liquid can get in there and bend the compressor. You always want to add it with just the gas, not the liquid. Yes, it takes longer, but it's more accurate and it won't damage anything. Yeah, here we go. 0.82. We'll take the hoses off first and put the caps back on. First you open them up and you pop them, put the top back on, get it nice and snug, and do the same thing down here. Don't burn your hands, there's not much room. That was put in a bad place. I would have put it someplace else. And put the low side cap back on. Get it nice and snug with your fingers. So we're buttoning it up and take it for a spin. And I can already tell the difference. That's cold, even that's cold. Well, we'll take it on a good 15-minute trip. And lo and behold, even though it's 95 degrees outside, it's nice and cool inside on max cold. So realize, you got a car. You don't know what anybody's done to the AC system. Never assume that it doesn't have air in the system, the wrong refrigerant, the wrong amount of refrigerant. If in doubt, you can't find any external things wrong like this. The compressor was spinning, there were no codes. Empty the system out. Fill it back up with a factory load and see what happens. In this case, it's blowing freezing cold now. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.